So in my youth, I always thought that I was going to be a teacher when I grew up. Both my parents have worked at schools for most of my life, still do, and it was kind of just the profession that was in my purview for my entire upbringing. So I was pleasantly surprised when after college I got a job at a boarding school, and it turned out I loved teaching. I loved being in the classroom and planning syllabi. I loved hanging out with teenagers. I loved coaching sports. But over the course of that year, I noticed that a lot of my students were really stressed out, and a lot of them weren't happy. They were struggling with anxiety and depression and the beginnings of eating disorders and addictions. And it pained me a little bit to just, kind of come into the classroom each day and go over Catcher in the Rye when I knew there were bigger things going on for these kids. And so during that year, I ended up applying to divinity school with the intention of bolstering my profession as an educator and my education of religion, and also getting a few pastoral and counseling skills. So it went. I ended up falling into the ministerial path while in divinity school, and by the time I was graduating, I had lined up an internship at a local UU church and was slowly checking all the boxes of the MFC for ordination. And it turns out when I got to Fallen, where I did my internship, I was also hired as their youth advisor. So I really got to try out this role of being, an advisor, a teacher, a presence for youth, and also a minister at the same time. And like my boarding school experience, I was really grateful when it turned out I really liked it. And I seemed to have a positive impact on a lot of people in the congregation. And one of the things I discovered that I wasn't quite ready to discover when I took on the challenge of UU ministry was that in parish settings, there's this really cool thing, right? Where you get to, be present to a 4-year-old and have a fascinating conversation about spirituality with a young child, and then in the same breath be able to turn to maybe an 84-year-old and have an equally fascinating spiritual conversation with them. And so I suddenly realized all the possibilities of multi-generational ministry, which is one of the foundational bricks of my ministry now. And so by the time I had finished that internship and passed the MFC and received the go-ahead to get ordained and become a minister, I had also lined up a job as a DRE in a big church outside of Washington, D.C., where I oversaw a very large RE program of about 200 children. It was a big project. And there were many aspects of that job that I loved and were so beneficial to who I am as a minister. And there are also a handful of elements that made it just not quite the right fit for me. So I ended up returning to the Northeast and taking a position as an interim minister of faith formation at North Parish, which is a church outside of Boston. And this was a brand new position for the church. I was charged with creating a ministry of faith formation. And this was another big growing experience for me. And, I suddenly was handed fiduciary responsibilities and tasked with making budgets and managing staff and writing board reports and having daily conversations with church leaders, not necessarily about pastoral issues, but about management issues. And again, I liked it, which was exciting. And I had the intention of going into search at the completion of that interim. But there weren't really any churches that were looking for a minister last year that I felt particularly called to. So my partner, Alexis, got a job at a boarding school up in northern New Hampshire. And admittedly, I've been curious about going back to teaching. I missed being in the classroom on a daily basis and having, deep, interesting conversations with teenagers every day. And so I followed her to the school and and was hired as their chaplain and religious studies faculty and school harassment counselor. And it was in that role that I both fell in love with teaching once again and developed a great capacity to hold many sides of a conflicted story as a harassment counselor, and also deeply missed parish ministry. And so I went into search this year. There were a couple of churches I was particularly interested, Yarmouth being one of them. And when I saw that they were listed this year, I felt called.